We view globalist agenda is the number one threat to the Canadian people, but the economy is the number one issue we're focusing on. And I'm going to start with the federal welfare programs. So this, everyone, is costing the Canadian taxpayer about $280 billion a year. And our issue with it is that we only want to support Canadians truly in need, and therefore cut the rest of this welfare program out. So we estimated a cut of 40% from the federal welfare program. That's what we're estimating. Only Canadians truly in need should have access to this generous benefit. Another aspect is the CBC state news. It's costing the Canadian taxpayer almost $1 billion a year. $1 billion a year. The National Citizens Alliance supports selling off the CBC to the highest bidder. We would do that within 6 months of forming government. This will save the Canadian taxpayer around $10 billion over 10 years. We're not against the CBC, but we think it should be privately funded, publicly funded. It should not be funded by the Canadian taxpayers. So for anyone out there who supports the CBC, well, you can use your money and fund it, but don't expect the Canadian taxpayers to fund it. So we will sell the CBC off. That's a savings of about $10 billion over 10 years. The third point here that we would do in our economic reform package is cut the federal bureaucracy by at least 25%. The average salary of a federal bureaucrat is approximately $114,000 a year. There are almost 979 federal bureaucrats as of 2016. So everyone, that's over 250,000 federal bureaucrats. Over that, we will cut at least 64,744 of them, and we would cut the ministries. Right now, there's 31 down to 10 ministries. We estimate that we will save the Canadian taxpayer over $100 million by doing these necessary cuts. We will save the taxpayer about $100 million. Another thing we want to do is cut the federal regulations that are choking entrepreneurship and small businesses. And we talk to a lot of small business owners and entrepreneurs. They're trying to start up new businesses, and they're just consumed with federal regulation, provincial regulation. So this is something we want to cut. Anything unnecessary that's not contributing to our society, we're going to cut right out. We're going to streamline it, and we will work with the business community on these major cuts. But there has to be a major overall cut of regulations. So just so everyone know where we're going, the NCA, we want to create a very friendly business environment in Canada. A very friendly business environment through cutting all the bureaucracy, the big government, cutting the regulations, and we're going to get on to other things later on in this. The fourth issue here is affirmative action. Affirmative action, everyone. In 1986, the Conservatives legislated the Employment Equity Act. We want to replace this act with the Employment Merit Act, whereby federal hires are based upon merit only. This initiative will ensure that the best Canadians for a particular job are serving the Canadian people. We have had enough. There's no way that it should be allowed that visible ethnic minorities are hired over Euro-Canadians when these Euro-Canadians are far more qualified for the job. We're going to put an end to this nonsense, everyone. and that will impact the economy. That will create a more efficient government, which will spin off into the economy. The fifth thing here is the equalization payout scheme. This socialist handout, I would argue hand down, which was legislated by the Conservatives in 1957, was a very ill-conceived idea. It is pure welfare socialist handout. And we believe as a party that when you're just handing out, it does not help anyone. You're encouraging less productivity, and you're also taking from those who are more productive. And that's something we are against. This is hurting our country, everyone. We would restructure the equalization payout scheme so that it's based on productivity, everyone. It has to be based on these so-called have-not provinces producing in order to receive some kind of handout. We will not just give a handout for nothing. They're going to have tangible results. Another thing we would do is reduce the payouts when the have provinces, British Columbia, Saskatchewan, Alberta, primarily, are in downturns. It's unfair to these provinces to expect them to keep handing out the same amount of money when their economies are in downturns, like we've seen in British Columbia, Alberta over the last few years. This is something we would change there. Another thing we would do with these equalization payouts is ensure that the provinces receiving them do not block any industrial developments, whether pipelines, other industrial developments. If they do, those transfer payouts will be reduced. There has to be accountability. There has to be respect both ways. The sixth thing here we're gonna look at is taxation, everyone. Canadians are hit with excessive taxation, very excessive taxation. The average family is paying around 43.6% of their income on tax. This is unacceptable, everyone. This is unacceptable. The National Citizens Alliance supports a simplified tax system. We have created a 3-tiered flat tax system. Canadians with income below the poverty line of $22,000, they would not have to pay tax. Canadians in incomes between $22,000 and $200,000, they would pay a 15% flat tax. And Canadians in incomes in excess of $200,000 would pay a 25% flat tax. And related to this, we would remove as many of these tax loopholes as possible. But we believe by simplifying the tax system, lowering taxes, it's going to stimulate the economy. It's going to put more money in Canadians' hands, which they can do whatever they want with. They can consume, they can start businesses, they can pursue entrepreneurship. That's what we believe. And related to this, we're going to eliminate the carbon tax, the federal carbon tax. This carbon tax, it's estimated it's going to cost on average $1,500 per individual in Canada, $1,500. This is all wrong, everyone. Canada is basically carbon neutral, and this carbon tax is basically, it's just like the GST. It's just a direct tax grab by the federal government. So that's something we would scrap on day one. It has no place in the Canadian economy. It's hurting us. It's hurting our business, and it's hurting us in terms of foreign competition. As mentioned, we're going to take a serious look at GST as well. Greg Burke and I will be discussing GST on Tuesday. on August 7th. So please join us there. Another serious issue that we're going to deal with is corporate welfare, everyone. Corporate welfare. In 2013, there was 6.4 million in corporate welfare. At least, that was 6.4 billion dollars in corporate welfare. In 2018, there was an estimated 29 billion in business subsidies. 29 billion of your hardworking tax dollars. And apparently half of this 29 billion was wasted. Wasted, everyone. Recently, and here's a couple examples to consider about the corporate welfare. Recently, the federal government and the Ontario provincial government gave 220 million to Toyota for a new plant that will create 450 jobs. That's almost a 500,000 subsidy per job. And what makes this worse is Toyota has record profits of 29 billion annually. 29 billion annually. It doesn't make sense, everyone. Another example, in 2017, the federal government gave 41.8 million to Honda Canada for another plant, another corporate welfare handout. It's unclear what's being paid back, if any. This is all wrong. Do your research online, everyone. There's hundreds and hundreds of companies that are receiving corporate welfare, our tax dollars. What we want to do is end corporate welfare, but at the same time, we want to create the most conducive, business-friendly environment through small, efficient government, eliminating unnecessary regulation, and also lowering taxes. And we believe if we create that environment, businesses will want to come here. Businesses will want to set up. Another issue is Aboriginal affairs. This is getting out of hand. The government estimated is paying around $13,000 per capita per year. This is 75% more than what the federal government spends on non-Aboriginal communities. And there are approximately 1.3 billion First Nations. The National Citizens Alliance supports First Nations, but we don't, again, this is a form of welfare. This is a form of like socialist handout. It's something we don't support. Our Aboriginal policy is working towards greater self-sufficiency of the First Nations, of the Inuit, the Métis. And this is also includes training, so they have the necessary skills to handle the monies and trades that they need to do to be self-sufficient. You know, we support a 10-year plan that would wean out the handouts down to the national norm. We got to end these welfare handouts. They're not helping anyone. So that's something we support. We support our Aboriginal community, but we believe the welfare handouts are doing more harm to them than good. And we will work with them to create greater self-sufficiency. And we will be a stronger country for it. Another issue is trade, everyone. I don't know if everyone knows, but the federal government recently passed the Trans-Pacific Partnership without any consultation of the Canadian people. And keep in mind, this is the same agreement that the U.S. government said was a bad trade deal. Yet the Canadian government went through with it. There's also FIPA, which the previous government passed, and which is a 35-year locked-in trade deal with China. We know all the problems with NAFTA, and then there was a recent trade deal with European Union. We have big issues with these big trade deals because they're eroding our sovereignty. They're secret trade tribunals. Corporations can bypass our laws. They can come here. They have more rights than the Canadian people. So we have real issues. Fundamentally, we support free trade, smart trade, fair trade. That is in the best interest of the Canadian people and does not compromise our sovereignty. So we will take a serious look at these trade deals and make sure they're working in the best interest of the Canadian people. And we don't believe they are. So, and related to this, we would move to create free trade with the U.S. And I know that's what President Trump wanted. And that's something we support, everyone. With free trade with the U.S., and that's elimination of all tariffs, barriers, it would benefit the majority of the Canadian people. Our goods, consumer costs, service costs would drop significantly. And this would benefit our American counterparts. So this is something we would work towards. But right now, unfortunately, these big parties are tied to industry lobbyists, the dairy board, the wheat board, other boards, and they're putting massive tariffs on goods. And we already know with the dairy, it's like 270%, 300%. This is hurting the Canadian consumer. Our product costs, our consumption costs are through the roof. That's why we pay so much more compared to the American products, coupled with our high taxation. So that is something we're going to deal with. We got to eliminate that, everyone. That's not helping anyone. That's only helping a certain minority sector, and it's hurting the majority of the Canadian people. So we're going to have to tear down those protectionisms, those tariffs, those duties, and try and get the greatest free trade with our trading partners. Now, a major issue now I'm going to turn to is immigration. Right now, there's around 300,000 immigrants entering the country, coupled with chain migration. And chain migration is when there's spouses, kids, all grandparents coming in after the initial immigrants arrive. So the 300,000 ends up being a lot more. The financial reality of this mass immigration going on, everyone, is that it is taxation negative to the tune of 35 billion plus a year. And what that means is the immigrants coming in are consuming more services than taxes paid, in excess of 35 billion a year. This is all wrong. This is all wrong. When the first pioneers and settlers came to Canada, they came here and made it for themselves, or they starved. Yet today, we have immigrants coming in, and they're on the gravy train as soon as they get here. They're getting health benefits. They're on our welfare, our social systems. They're put up in hotels. This is all wrong, everyone. And this is something we don't support. We would put a 5-year end to the welfare handouts. In addition, there would be a temporary pause to the 11-year backlog. Substantial reduction in the immigration to less than 50,000 a year. And we would end the chain migration. And now the foreign aid. I'm going to turn to foreign aid. This is crazy, everyone. The foreign aid. The foreign aid is costing the Canadian taxpayer around $166 per year per Canadian per year. The foreign aid is right now in 2017, it is 5.6 billion. 5.6 billion in 2017. And I'm going to go through some numbers here, everyone, just so everyone understands what's going on. In 2017, the Palestinian admin areas received 50.9 million of our tax dollars. Haiti received 126.5 million. Colombia received 66.7 million last year. Mali received 125.6 million. Afghanistan received 232.9 million. Syria received 122.8. Jordan received 157.1 million of our tax dollars. India received 96 million. Bangladesh received 104.7 million of our tax dollars. Pakistan, 91.1 million of our tax dollars. Egypt, 157.1 million of our tax dollars. And last year there was 764 million in bilateral unspecified. And that means we don't know who that money is going to. It's unspecified. And that's almost $1 billion. Related to this, and just recently, everyone, in March 2018, the federal government gave 12.65 million of our tax dollars to the Palestinian refugees. And this was through the UN and other international agencies. Quite frankly, everyone, this is all wrong. This is billions of dollars that are flowing out of our country. This is what's called the global world order. This is just pure globalist agenda, and it has nothing to do with the Canadian people. The NCA would cut this back. Our commitment is 75%, everyone, of the 5.6 billion. We want to pull back from the UN. We would cut all voluntary payments to the UN. The UN does some good work, but it's basically become an amoral institution. We are open to actually stepping away from the UN if that's what the Canadian people want, and we would hold a referendum on that. It's a fairly serious decision because you could argue it would isolate Canada, but we would ask the Canadian people how they feel about it. But the bottom line is that the NCA would cut back all foreign funding to the UN. Right now, we're paying 1.6 billion to their annual budget every 2 years. Everyone, 1.6 billion. But look at the money that's flowing out of the country, billions and billions of dollars, and it's not just this government, everyone. The previous government was doing the same. But like I said, the National Citizens Alliance wants a significant cutback. We have to put our people first. And that applies to the immigration, everyone. We want to cut back immigration 50,000 or less. 50,000 or less coming into our country. There is no correlation between economic growth and immigration. There's no correlation to increase in per capita income for individuals and immigration. The immigrants coming into our country, The mass immigration is hurting our economy. It's hurting our Canadian workers who are unemployed. It's making it tougher for them to find work. This is all wrong. Also, they're sucking into our health and welfare systems. We all know it. This has to stop. It's only benefiting certain commercial interests and the big parties through votes and money trickling back to them. This has to end, everyone. We are committed to a major reduction in immigration, and we support immigrants. I know some great immigrants. I know a guy from the Caribbean. This guy, he happens to be black, but he is incredibly hardworking. Day in, day out, he's working. But he told me all he does is pay tax and mortgage. That's not a life, everyone. And we know what the average Canadian deals with as well. So that's something we will deal with. The legal migration is a serious issue. We would end the legal migration by not accepting any asylum cases from the US, coupled with the fact by having no welfare social service handouts for at least 5 years. We have to stop the gravy train, everyone. 5 years, you come to country, you make a goal of it. You don't depend on us. You make a goal of it, or you're not coming into the country. Right? So this is going to help our economy. And I've talked about this before, but the immigration is insane going on. And all those big parties support it. They're bringing hundreds of thousands of unemployed foreign university students into Canada. It does not make sense. It's adding to our unemployment. And as I mentioned, it's making it tougher for the Canadian worker, especially the one that's unemployed. This is all wrong, everyone. So this is something we would deal with. And we have to deal with the UN, the billions and billions of dollars that are going to help people in Africa, Asia, while they're ignoring our own people. This is all wrong. Now I'm going to turn to the federal debt. The federal debt, everyone. And right now it's over $657 billion. The federal debt is over $1 trillion in market debt. Over $1 trillion. We are a debtor nation. All this money that the federal government is dishing out, for example, they have a child care plan. And that's just a way to bribe the voters. That's just adding to our debt, everyone. We're a debtor nation. The 12.65 to the Palestinians, that's just adding to our debt, everyone. It does not make sense. We're giving money we do not have. We do not support this. This is fiscally insane. Fiscally insane, everyone. And what these governments do is just pass the buck down to another government. And we say, no, we got to stop this. It's putting our people last. And what's worse, all this debt, the federal debt, is owed to commercial banks. And there's over $30 billion in debt service payments of your hardworking money that goes to commercial banks every year, everyone. And every time they add to the debt, they're just giving more money to these commercial banks. And nationally, it's over $64 billion now, our debt. If we look at the federal, provincial, and municipal level, $64 billion plus to commercial banks, everyone. So we're going to deal with this head on. And what we want to do as a party is reinstitute the 1934 Bank of Canada Act, which would then restore the public lending right of the Bank of Canada. And we lost this right in 1972 thanks to Pierre Trudeau, but we want to reinstitute it. And then we want to use the Bank of Canada to pay off this massive debt at very low or 0% interest. Then we would have mandatory balanced budgets, and we would have a debt payment plan to pay off this debt. There would be inflation because of this, but at least we would stop the drain to these commercial banks. We have to get back to what the Canada was at the beginning of the century. So this is something the NCA takes very seriously, everyone. All these debt service payments means less for our veterans, seniors, for our youth. It's all wrong, everyone, but that's something we would tackle head on.